So let's talk a little bit about the facilitation between my mom. So I was a teenager. Obviously, you were with me from my mom was still alive, and the listeners don't know, but my mother got sick when I was 15 and ended up with brain cancer. And so she was struggling with her own health. And Pam was there and still my bonus mom during that time period. My mom had struggles just being strong, being a mom, being somebody who can set boundaries. And I was definitely a little bit of a wild child and, didn't like to listen too much. And Pam would step in. So talk a little bit about how you, I would say, did that in a constructive way without stepping on the other people's toes. Because being a bonus mom or a stepmom is challenging, right? Or stepdad, should I say? How can you be part of the setting of boundaries and setting structure without taking on the role of a parent?
Yeah, I think it's not a skill most of us are taught. And I think partly because I had the kind of business background I had where I was working with executive teams and dealing with conflict and so on, I at least could have some of the basic skills. But the first thing is to start with the question, what's going on? How are you feeling? You don't say, well, what's the story behind this? What's got you stuck? What is your hope for? I would say to your mom when she was dealing with, should I let Tania? A lot of times it was her feeling insecure about what's the right thing to do. And she would be talking to your friends' moms and trying to get their perspective and then trying to juggle all those thoughts. And so then I would end up on the phone with her and she'd say, well, I talked to these 3 neighbors, or I talked to 4 of Tanya's dance moms. And so there was that sort of not feeling confident that she was going to make the right decision. So part of what I would do is simply ask her, well, what feels right? And what is it that you're really wrestling with? So I started a lot of those conversations with questions so that I could hear how she was thinking and how she was feeling. And then I would ask her things like, well, what are you afraid is going to happen? Now, that's different than when she calls because you flooded the house because you had a party that shouldn't have been going on. That's a little different conversation. But for those other things, should I let her go on this trip with her dance group? Should I go, because she loved to go on those trips with you. And so I would always start with, well, what's got you stuck? Or what are you worried about? So if I could hear that underlying question going on for her, then it wasn't about problem solving the actual, should she go on the trip question. It was more of helping her get in touch with what was she worried about. And then when she could sort of speak to that, we can talk about, well, if she went on this trip or if you did this, what are some ways that could ease your worry? And sometimes I would just say, hey, you know what? That's just because she's 15. Even though I didn't have other kids of my own who went through adolescence, I remember being 15. So, yeah, I think part of it is just starting with the question.
I think that also, I think that people have this desire for this amicable resolution. But again, you said it takes 3, right? And so sometimes being the bonus mom, you might have the desire to have that relationship with your new partner's ex-wife or new partner's ex-husband, but yet there's not that reciprocation. So how do you, or what would you suggest if you come up to some of these barriers? Are there different communication techniques? Are there different things that you could say that might allow for that other individual to maybe be a little bit more open-minded to the relationship?
That's the hardest part. I mean, my husband now had he just had a terrible divorce, and it has affected his kids ever since. One of the things he would say is, well, Nancy just hates me. And we would be going to the grandkids' soccer games, and she would be in the stadium or on the bleachers, and we would be on the bleachers. And I simply refused in my own head to go with, she hates Jim. I said instead to myself, she probably has reason to be angry with him. She hasn't let go of that. I don't have to buy into the way she's thinking and the way she's feeling. So I am going to interact with her as a human to human, a woman to woman. Both of us are divorced. Both of us love these grandkids, laugh when she laughed, I mean, genuinely. Hug the kids, always let her hug them first, and I hugged them second. So defer to her until she finally, that ice finally broke. And I can remember at one point, I have to make sure I don't cry.
Yeah.
We were at a soccer game or something, and her husband at the time was dying of cancer. And Jim went up to her and put his arm around her, and she hugged him back. And it was like, oh my God, I never would have imagined seeing. So part of my role was to act as if she does not hate him. She's hurting, she's angry, or whatever. And my role is to be as genuine a person as I can be with her and help chip away that unbelievable ice that was around her so that then Jim would have a place back in that relationship. But it was all because of the grandkids. Because that was our mutual love. You can dislike the person, but you sure love those grandkids.
Yeah, I know. I had a different guest on, Molly Faye, and she had an incredibly amicable divorce. And her ex was always asked about, like, I can't believe that, how well you guys get along. Like, how do you do it? He's like, I love my children more than I hate Molly. And he doesn't really hate her, but then, she was telling the story, but like he put those children first. And as much as they might have decided that their marriage wasn't going to work and they had differences, and he just put that aside for the sake of the children, and that it was the super child-centric. And that is what we do at Better Than Bitter for those that have children. We remind people that it is not your children's fault that you are not, going to stay together. So what are you going to do to be the adult in the room? To put your emotions in check so you can show up for your kids in a productive way. People who can't do that risk creating very long-lasting trauma on their children. That high conflict where children feel like they're stuck in the middle, where they hear disparaging information from each parent about each parent from the other. That is what creates a lot of trauma. And I've had 2 guests now talk about the fact that if you disparage, you don't recognize that the fact that what's going through the kid's head is like, hey, I'm 50% mom and I'm 50% dad. If I'm hearing that mom is so horrible by dad, I'm 50% bad. And it might not be coming as consciously, but subconsciously, the kids feel that. And again, I've heard this from a couple of guests. So obviously, there's been some research around this that has been published in the divorce world about like the dangers of disparaging.